from Europe with what's called pre-settled status or settled status. Now, that system was in place until June this year. It's still in place, and it's probably likely to stay in place for another, sort of 10 years or so, because obviously newborn children, etc., and family members will join that scheme. However, for those existing Europeans, if they didn't register before June, I'm going to be completely honest, they can still make a delayed application, but it's unlikely to be successful. So we're going to kind of go worst case scenario here. You've got your Europeans and your non-Europeans that started work with you, or you're wanting to start work after the transition period and after the EU settlement scene closed to new applicants in June. So you may get caught up in these people that are here as visitors. Our European nationals can still visit the UK up to 6 months. That's causing a bit of a grey area, certainly because we can only spend 90 days in any European country. So there's a bit of disproportionate to the rules, and they're not so much equal. You've got obviously your students, especially medical students, or those obviously doing studying in the health industry. And then you obviously have parents of children not so relevant to your industry. Tier 5 seasonal workers could have come in place, not so much for your industry, but certainly could actually provide an alternative switching category going forward. Domestic worker, no. But I guess you're going to come up more so those visiting the UK that either just visited and they've got caught up and travelling back home because of COVID, or just visiting and want to switch into these visas, or finishing a course of study, for example. So this is just a summary of those who can switch inside the UK. Ideally, you kind of want these guys if you can, because you would ordinarily not need to pay what was called a skill surcharge, which is another government fee, which can be even more costly. But in any event, 9 times out of 10, people in the UK here in many capacities would have to return home to make an application, some sort of visa application, for which we're going to go into more detail. And just for those of you who are not aware, skilled workers, so really good to make the distinction between skilled workers, essentially our work permission in the UK. Okay, so it was historically called a tier 2, and it was subsequently replaced with skilled worker. Okay, there are benefits of that change, and one of the main ones was removing what was called the resident labour market test, which was a requirement for you guys as employers to advertise for the positions on offer. So there are some advantages of now it being called skilled worker. So skilled worker requires you guys as employers, or in some instances recruiter agencies, to obtain what's called a sponsor license. Now, even though you may not have one individual in mind, or you may have 10 or 20 individuals who may just have a general difficulty or shortage in actually identifying these candidates, or even hiring the candidates to then outsource to your clients. I spoke in great detail the last few weeks with a number of healthcare sector employers, and basically we found that 9 times out of 10, having the license in the first place, the sponsor license, the actual vehicle to be able to sponsor people from outside the UK, was a huge benefit in itself for a number of reasons. Not only does it give you a great deal of flexibility in terms of your recruitment over the next, going forward, basically, but it actually gives you, you appear as an employer on a public register of, called a reputable sponsorable firms. So you become attractive, not only, I guess, from the candidate's point of view, because when they're looking for to join a recruitment firm, or they're looking to join an employer, they would presumably will be checking this register now to see if you're actually in a position to sponsor them. You've got to think from a competitive angle here. Then if one employer's got a sponsor license, the other isn't, it becomes much more attractive for the candidate themselves. Also, what we found is where we've got many of our healthcare clients applying for RFP, or responding to RFPs, or for getting the interest from the third-party clients, especially the NHS, for example. The NHS would expect you as an employer to have a sponsor license in place. If you're a recruiter as well, like I said, historically, 9 times out of 10 you wouldn't be the employing entity, so you maybe have that misconception that you don't need a license or you're not able to get a license. That certainly is a misconception, and something certainly we've been successful in getting sort of a number of recruitment agencies the sponsor license in order for them to then outsource to a third-party client site such as the NHS. If we just move on. Is that moving your end, Mara?
Yeah, it's on points. Has it moved for you?
No, it's not.
No, it's delayed again.
Okay, so I've got them in front of me.
Yeah.
Okay, so so once you've got the sponsor license in place, and we're not going to go into great detail about the sponsor license process because presumably, as I've kind of checked off the list of audience and kind of there's a difference between quite a few of you holding the license and then a few of you not even having the license. So obviously, for those of you who haven't, the starting point would be the sponsor license, okay? And like I said, if you're a recruitment agency, please don't listen to other providers necessarily when it comes to recruitment agency standalone policy of you cannot get a sponsor license, because that certainly is untrue. Once you have the sponsor license in place, or what are the roles themselves sponsorable? Now, your industry as a whole has been the focus of a lot of lobbying over the last year. It has created a shortage of workers. Now you're losing obviously the European workforce. You suddenly have found yourself that if you've got vacant positions that you can't fill, or you can't find the resources in the first place for the vacant roles. So what happens when you have the sponsor license in place? We look at the job role. So the individual has to have the job offer from a sponsoring organisation such as yourselves. That allows for 20 points. Basically, our points-based system is what it says on the tin. It's an accumulation of points, and the more points means prizes for any of you that remember the generation game back in the day. Basically, and then obviously there's a level of English language. Now, again, this is an interesting one with English language. People assume in EU countries that they're majority-speaking countries, which would automatically meet it. And I can tell you it's not, surprisingly. If you're a US national, you'd automatically meet the English language requirement, but for some reason or another, if you're from Europe, the Home Office doesn't recognise that. So you would have to obviously have an academic qualification that's taught in English, and that has to be verified by a government system for which fees apply. Not our fees, but government fees. And like I said, it's mainly looking at the job themselves. So if we take, kind of carers for instance, as a generic example, they would be a responsible category, and in fact they fall under what's called a shortage occupation lists, where the government has realised that by changing the immigration system, they have created a shortage in that industry, for which they're very keen to fill. But at the same token, they are very keen for companies to either recruit British nationals. And if you can't, for whatever reason, recruit British nationals, they want you to train them up. So when you're talking about your mid-level carers or management positions and things like that, obviously the argument there is that, the experience dictates that you can't train for that position. However, you need to be bearing in mind, if you haven't got a sponsor license, you're going to come up with a lot of Home Office scrutiny in terms of why you're not recruiting British workers for this job, and why you can't train them up in the alternative. So essentially, you've got the sponsor license, you've got the you get the 20 points for that. The job itself is a recruitable job, so i.e. a carer, and obviously the English language requirement itself. So essentially, you're in a position to issue the work authorization to the individual in question. There's further points that can be attained as a result of our new immigration system. There were points that you could kind of, transition. I would say, okay, I get 10 points for this, but actually I get 30 points for this. And you could kind of swap points over. Also, it really is important from a salary, or at least from your point of views, that what you have to pay these individuals. So what you pay and how many working hours is fine. That's your business model. However, when it comes to immigration, unfortunately, it's a Home Office dictate what you can and can't pay them. So we're not talking about national minimum wage here, which you may have heard is about to increase again, quite significantly. But we're talking about here is there's either the going rate for the type of job. Okay, so we're going to go into some specific examples of it in a minute, but depending on the job title or job role, duties and responsibilities itself, the Home Office dictates to you what you need to pay individuals. And then also we need to look at the salary in accordance with the working hours. And I'll tell you why. So this is particularly relevant really to the hospitality industry, not something where they're working sort of 50 hours or more and they need to be prorated. But certainly I know with your industry, it is a lot of overtime as well. So it's very hard to keep account of that. We're looking at the guaranteed basic salary here, and anything in addition to that is a bonus. But for the purposes of immigration, we're looking at the guaranteed basic salary. And you can add any additional guaranteed bonuses, but only guaranteed salary package itself. Like I said, we're going to go into specific examples of your salary, but that's the overall. So here's a great example of, so you come to me, you've got the sponsor license, for example, and you say, Dora, we want to hire, 2 senior care workers. We want to hire, if you're another industry, software engineer, for example. This is the next slide is a good example of how much you need to pay. So using your the example of senior care assistants, you can see that the going rate for that occupation from the Home Office is 16,900. And just to bear in mind that the Home Office working hours is dictated as 39 hours per week. So if they're working 35, then you can assume that they kind of meet it quite happily. If they're working sort of 40 hours and above, and you prorata it, it's not, quite likely that they may fall short of the minimum requirement by virtue of having a higher number of working hours. Okay. And bearing in mind anything you're saying on the the work authorization to the Home Office, so the working hours, the salary, everything, once you have this sponsor license in place, you can always get audited or visited by the Home Office, as you certainly can do as an employer anyway. A lot of you out there will be used to health and safety audits and just data protection audits and things like that. It's the same way as a Home Office operate. They would expect anything you say to them or disclose to them in terms of salary, working hours, to be in line with the contracts of employment, and they expect any recruitment agencies out there to have third-party contracts in place with the client sites that they're sourcing the individuals to. Yeah, so whether that be the NHS or just a private company, so we're expected to have either a master service agreement in place, for example, and their work and the individual's work authorization has to be in accordance with that client site. So if you have a contract between yourselves and a third party for 1 year, then you can't go and issue work authorization for carers for 2 years, because obviously the contract needs to support the provision of services for the specific duration. If we look at these are some other roles on the next slide. So we had a senior care workers, personal friend. This is like again the going rate for those professions. Again, depending on the roles, you'll have a minimum salary. So you've got recent graduates. Bearing in mind as well, a lot of students as well will be at the very start of their careers. So the Home Office actually acknowledged that, and so the actual minimum salary is starts at 20,000 for those, or the going rate. So whatever's higher. So if the going rate for that position is 16,900. But for the actual new entrant rate is 20, you have to go with the highest rate of 20, so you can't pay them 16, even though that the senior care worker job description dictates you can pay them that. So it's whatever one's higher, basically. So we've given you a list here because we thought it was useful. We're often asked by individuals of what SOC code are we, for example. Again, just to clarify, standard occupational code, that's a list of all potential job titles in the UK that the Home Office then map to duties and responsibilities. So some obvious ones here, along with the salary bands expected. Now, we do appreciate that obviously the industry like the NHS and things work at various band levels, and people can start at one band and then transition into another one, for which needs to be obviously kept up to date and recorded to the Home Office. But for the purposes of today's webinar, we thought it would be useful to list those out. Next one. Okay, so we've got the job we've got our sponsor license, we've got the job role, we've got the salary, and now we're looking at the additional requirements like the English language, like we said. And again, we're going into examples of being from a majority English speaking country, so your US, your Australians, your New Zealand nationals. But for your EU nationals, you need to be looking at their qualifications that need to be verified for a government scheme, or they have an English test. And like I said, it has to be a B1, reading, writing, speaking and listening. And just to add to this as well, I think we're going to go on to that just briefly later on, but just to add, in addition to any of these visa requirements, because of your industry sector, there's a requirement for criminality checks as well. And obviously you'll do your own due diligence in terms of DBS checks as well. There is a financial requirement, and this is not unusual across the Immigration Board. Basically, when you're issuing your work authorizations, there is basically essentially a tick box on the work authorization that says, are you as an employer or a sponsor in this instance happy to undertake maintenance on behalf of the individual? Now, when we talk about maintenance, it means this financial requirement. Now, I'm often asked by employers, if we tick that box, what does that mean to us? And I'm going to say to you, from a legal point of view, there is no liability imposed on you if you tick that box. So, and ticking that box will avoid the individuals themselves having to evidence the maintenance or financial requirement by virtue of providing all their bank statements, which one can be a very cumbersome process. Secondly, the banks, we probably all know, are not in the nowadays not issuing original bank statements, and PDF copies will need to be certified. And thirdly, these funds need to be held for a period of time before the application. So if they fell short, like drew, a certain amount of money or a nominal amount of money at the ATM, it would mean that their whole financial thresholds are amiss because they fell short for one day. So if you get a situation where you're asked to provide maintenance, my advice would be to tick the box, because actually there's no liability imposed on you. It's literally just an immigration requirement. Again, as I said, this is a huge thing. So you might undertake your own DBS checks, and you may think that's sufficient. But certainly for immigration, for the industry you're working, you're expected to do a criminal record. Now, importantly, this only applies to people applying for entry clearance outside the UK. So for those obviously making their application outside, for those switching, there is not this requirement at the moment. Okay, so we've obviously listed the standard occupational code, so the job descriptions and titles for which the criminal record would be required. Okay, so that kind of gives us a bit of an overview as to what's happened, why we've got here, and what's the current status quo. In terms of what's happening at the moment, you probably know more than me on this, but there is a huge crisis across the board. I'm going to be honest with you, we've had similar webinars for this for the hospitality industry, the farming industry, and mainly the best example at the moment is to look at the HGV drivers. So everyone was in exactly the same boat. In fact, actually probably a worse situation than yourselves, because their roles wasn't sponsorable. Now yours are, but it comes with a lot of regulatory checks, of course. But what we've had is a situation where obviously people were bringing COVID into this situation. Yes, you can get these people. Yes, they've passed a criminality. Yes, they can do visas. Yes, they're currently working with you. But because they fall short of their own personal decision, they've decided not to have the vaccines. We have obviously been told that everyone is about to lose their job as a result of that. And you may have heard quite a lot about that in the media. I think a lot of people have already lost them. But certainly the case of the new people that are hiring. So you want to kind of build, with obviously being mindful of employment law considerations. You want to be mindful of the same way as you're looking at right to work for your employees. Do they have the right to work? Do you have the right to outsource them to a third-party client site? You want to kind of be asking yourself, do they have the vaccine, so that once you hire them, then they're not going to fall short, and the third party, for example, won't be able to hire them because of their vaccine situation. So this is just a long list of problems that's occurred, but this is a huge current one for you guys that you need to be aware of. And my suggestion would be to build this into your recruitment exercise for the time being. Okay, so then the alternative to skilled worker visa is a specific visa just for you guys. The government kind of realise that you're a special industry in itself, and obviously bearing in mind that you're key workers as well to the to the country. So they implemented what was called a healthcare visa, which was an alternative to the skilled worker. So again, it goes back to the same sort of indications of your salary criteria, the salary threshold, and meeting the English language. So the premise is exactly the same. It's just that the requirements are slightly different, and it's to allow those people that were already on the Tier 2 or skilled worker to transition into this category. Oh, I feel like we've got to the end already. And what we've done is, because there's a difference between recruiters and employers on the call, we thought it would be a good opportunity to open up the floor for as many questions as you want for the time being. So does anybody have any questions? No?
I have no questions, thank you.
Oh.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so you mentioned about ticking the maintenance box.
Yeah.
Now, is it too late to change it once the application is submitted?
Yeah, unfortunately it is so. So if you've got into the position where you, so for everyone else, I'm guessing so that you have the sponsor license, you issued your certificate of sponsorship for the individual, okay, and now that certificate of sponsorship has now facilitated the visa. That's for those of you who don't know the process. So basically, yes, once you've issued the certificate, if you haven't proceeded to the visa application itself, I'll be honest with you, you can actually add a sponsor note after the effect. So if you've made any errors in the certificate of sponsorship, the duration of the visa, you've failed to tick a box, or anything else, if you haven't proceeded to the visa application, there's always an opportunity to add what's called a sponsor note, to make any amendments to the certificate of sponsorship before you submit it to the visa application. But at the point that you do the visa application, there is no opportunity. So what you would expect the individual is to submit pay slips, bank statements, sorry, personal bank statements covering the maintenance, or in the alternative is to submit a letter of maintenance undertaking from the employer. So depending on what you said, submitted the application, but if you haven't submitted it yet, what you would do in the absence of ticking the maintenance box is you'd provide a letter of authority, maintenance undertaking, and you can extend that to dependents. One of the other benefits of ticking it on the certificate of sponsorship is it automatically extends to dependent family members applying at the same time. And the same way as you can give a letter of maintenance undertaking, which will extend to the dependents. Okay. The only other alternative is for them to show the personal bank statements.
I have a question as well.
Yeah.
Actually, we already have a home office sponsor license, and we're hoping to hire overseas. So you talked about like maintenance fees for the candidate. Is that the candidate has to like maintain a certain amount of fee for a certain period of time?
Yeah, I mean, it's slightly different. So basically, it's a general maintenance. If we go back to Marin, do you want to go back to the side of maintenance? Basically, it's a general So basically, across the immigration board, there is a maintenance and English language requirement for every type of visa. Yeah, it's no different. The salary amount the amount that they have to demonstrate only really changes when it comes to the student visas, because that's dependent on their course and duration. But for the purposes of the skilled worker, the maintenance undertaking is exactly the same. And there is no way that an immigration application will pass unless you have, one, ticked the certificate of sponsorship box that says I will undertake maintenance on behalf of the individuals and the dependent family members, or secondly, in the alternative of you've forgotten to do the certificate of sponsorship, tick the box, is to provide the letter of maintenance undertaking. And you can just address the letter as maintenance undertaking, and obviously we can help draft that letter as well. And then the third chance is to show personal bank statements. And like I said, you know, that can be quite, for a family of 4, for example, that was quite a hefty amount to show. Yeah.
Yep. Also,
sorry, sir.
Sorry. So basically, company can show the company's like bank statement on behalf of the candidate.
No, not a company. It needs to be personal bank statements, or you guys are just ticking a box. So you don't have to ever show. The irony is either the individual has to show personal amount for which they need to show the amount. As a company, by ticking the box, you don't have to demonstrate anything. You could have 0 funds for all the home office care because they will never check. So like I said, to be honest, 9 times out of 10. there's no downside to ticking that maintenance box, because if it comes to a liability issue and just say the individual, you'd have to undertake maintenance from a liability or employment law perspective, there's no obligation on you to maintain what you've said you're going to do. Yep. So as long as the intention at the time is that you would at least consider undertaking maintenance for them, that's absolutely fine.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Hi, I've got a question as well.
Yeah, of course.
My question is around the home office visit. Basically, with CQC as a regulator, we already know what they'll be coming in to look out for. So in terms of getting the sponsorship with the home office visit, what does it normally they come looking out for, to be honest?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you make a good point. I mean, you can be as knowledgeable as you can at the start of the process as to what they are looking for. But I can tell you 9 times out of 10, one, they changed their focus. So originally, you know, in 2008 and and beyond, the Home Office was very keen to get people on this sponsor license register. You know, let's not talk about the money element of it, but they wouldn't have had an immigration system if no one signed up to it. So I'm going to say they were relatively lenient of who they allowed on it. Yeah. Everyone was given an A rated. I guess a lot of the people who said they got a license will automatically by default got the A rating. But then what you've tended to do over the years is now they've got more stringent. So historically, they would always likely visit you. Yeah. But before you get the license, for those of you who haven't got a license, just bear in mind that the Home Office can always visit you anyway. And the reason being is that the Prevention of Illegal Working legislation runs through every UK employer. So your duty to evidence somebody's right to work is there regardless of whether you hold this sponsor license. So just as a side note, you should all be taking your passport copies, and for your Europeans now, you need to making sure they've got the visas as well as your non-Europeans. But for yourself, sir, you've got the sponsor license. Now, as part of the sponsor license process, there's always a chance that they could do a pre-license visit for the purposes of giving you a successful outcome. Okay. I'm going to be honest, since I've done this since 2008, none of my clients have ever got a pre-license visit. And the reason being is that IES, we prepare the application so robustly with your compliance in mind that it makes it kind of, it minimises any risk of you getting a pre-license visit. So then you get your successful license tomorrow not having been visited. But unlike a lot of providers, we don't just leave you be. Thank you for, we've got your license and that's it. We're working with you on an ongoing basis to make sure that, one, you have the compliance, your housekeeping is ordered from day one. It's not worth us submitting the sponsor license and you're not doing your right to work checks and you get visited and you either don't get granted the sponsor license or you lose your license. It's no one wins. So it's one, having a provider that's got your compliance in mind from day one. Is your housekeeping in order when you make the sponsor license, or in the likelihood, always prepare for the worst, that they could visit you tomorrow. So right to work checks, things like that. We always make sure that. Also with us as well is we make sure that we prepare like what's called compliance packs as well on completion of like skilled worker or previously called tier 2 work applications. We would always do a compliance pack that basically you just hold on your file, and if you're visited, you print off this HR individual's HR file with all of these tick box things. We also provide a lot of tailor-made things. Don't think of immigration anymore as a transactional based, like we need a visa, who can we get to help. It's more about working with people as a very proactive way, like you've just quite rightly said. What about our compliance? Well, what about it? So we do much wider scope of doing, audits. We pretend we're the Home Office, a very nicer version of it. But we obviously work in comparison, in hand in hand with the Home Office. And certainly in my former life, part of my job was being on the premium sponsor team. So part of my job was to work, with the Home Office to get that scheme in place. So it's kind of knowing what they're looking for, which is forever changing. Now you're not having so much on-site visits. So a lot of people are saying, well, we all work remotely now, so the likelihood of getting visited is nil. Well, no, that's not true, because everything's online now. So yes, you can conduct your right to work checks over Skype or video, but you're still expected to do your face-to-face checks. What happens if you're outsourcing them? This is the main one, is if you're then outsourcing the person to a third-party client side, whether you're information technology or whether you're a recruiter, for example, you're expected to have them third-party client contracts in place, and you're meant to know where your individuals are at any given time. If that means them changing multiple locations because they're locuming for a week or two, then you're meant to be updating their work authorization constantly. If the Home Office visit you or they go online on one day and you haven't got right to work checks done, or you don't know where your migrant workers are, and you haven't got any HR systems in place to monitor these situations, and in addition, you've got your sponsor license in place, there's additional obligations, compliance obligations, then what happens is they'll downgrade your license to a B, where you put like a public list of to watch, where you're given a 6-month sort of implementation plan to sort of improve upon. Or in worst cases, where there's either a significant breach or multiple breaches, then what happens is they'll just revoke your license, which means anybody working for you at that time will their work authorization becomes null and void. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. I think the final add-up was around if we wanted to take this forward, A, in terms of price tags, you know, with the whole package, and B as well, what is the timelines for you to get your license? Because at the moment we're looking at 6 months for personal visa application and stuff like that.
No, so, yeah, that sounds significant. I mean, in terms of like, I'm not going to give off. We're happy to talk about individual cases, and I will say to you that we are offering some free consultations, which my colleague will tell you about after. But there's a couple of things to note here. Sponsor license, you're going to get different packages and different offers across the board, and I can certainly tell you, before joining here, I work for some of the big four. Okay, so I've seen a significant difference in packages and offers and stuff like that. What the reason of joining, one of the main benefits of being joining, one of the main reasons I wanted to join RAS was because the purposes of the bigger firms, for example, one, they've probably been more expensive. We're a consultancy firm, so not a law firm, but second, but mainly it was a case of there was this focus on transactional visas, you know, money, whatever. I mean, we tried to take the approach of one, we work on a fixed fee, transparent process. So you'll know the fees from the outset. There's no hidden costs. We also break down all the government fees. So yes, we might get your sponsor license, but we also break down the cost of you for each visa type later on. And not so much our costs, it's all the government costs. We then look at you like, well, as a company, are you going to be able to, is this going to be workable? So then we offer solutions in the way of, we implement what's called clawback clauses in your contract. So if you are sending an offer of employment out, we get a clawback to say if that individual joins you then leaves, you can get the fees reimbursed. And then also what we do is we implement robust sort of clauses in contracts, and also we offset. We look at reimbursement policies. So we have a lot of companies that will sort of pay the government fees out, for example, for the visa, but then they're asked for that back, you know, in salary from the individual. And the main example of that is what's called the immigration health surcharge. For those of you familiar, it started off as £200, then it was £400 a year, and now it's 64. So what you're thinking is one visa is costing you, even just one government fee alone, is that sort of roughly £1,800. So you need to be looking at how many numbers, you know, we work on. Let's get to know your industry. Okay, who are you looking to recruit? Not so much, well, immediately. Okay, you could have one person in mind, but let's look at the next 12 months, because applying for your sponsor license now with a forward-thinking mindset of your recruitment needs over the next 12 months will be beneficial now, because it'll bring costs down. We can build all of this into your sponsor license now, so that when your sponsor license is approved, and official processing times is around 16 weeks, I'm going to say, you know, with a help over provider, I'm not just going to, you know, shove us down your throat, but, you know, with the help of any provider, if it's done carefully, you can bring them timings down significantly.
Yeah.
But what you do want is somebody that's going to know your industry and make a business case as well for your industry as a whole, but also look at adding any job roles that you have to the sponsor license request from the outset. So rather than wait the 16 weeks for the sponsor license to be approved and then going back to the Home Office and going, well, now we want to hire 3 people in the next 12 months. Well, then the extra 16 weeks is added on top of that, and another £200 per job description from the Home Office point of view. So it's about kind of, looking at everything, and you're telling us exactly what you want and what to achieve. And that's coming up with 1, solutions, but 2, secondary, a package that's cost effective for you.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm just gonna interrupt you there, Laura. We've got quite a few questions in the chat, and we would like to address those. But I do want to just mention that we'll be sending out an email out to everybody that's joined today, or everybody that signed up, with a link to allow you to book a free consultation with Laura. It will be like a 30-minute consultation. Like a lot of people have questions now, you can book that in for either Friday this week or early next week. So any burning questions will definitely get addressed at that point. There's just some in the chat that I want to read out to you now, Laura.
Yeah.
there seems to be a bit of confusion with recruitment agencies and how the sponsor license works for them. As people are saying that people are asking if they need a sponsor license as an agency.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's why I think I started the call with the definitions from the Home Office point of view here, because I've been speaking to many clients over the recruitment agencies, especially over the last few weeks, and they're saying, well, they don't think they need to get the license. Their business model is that they call, some of them were calling people workers. So when we get down to the nitty and gritty of what that means to you. So what does it mean to you, first of all? And like I said, you may have your own definitions. Some of it might not be called, you don't call them employees, you call them workers, because they're actually not directly working for you, you're outsourcing them out. You need to really get down to the nitty and gritty of who is paying the salary here, okay? There's not so much the salary, because that could also still be paid by the third person, but who is ultimately responsible for this individual? Now, 9 times out of 10, from what, at least the last few weeks, historically, let's go back. Historically, recruitment agencies were never really responsible. You were really responsible for sourcing the individual and then just handing them over to the thing, and you get your commission and happy days. Not to obviously soften. But nowadays, especially because of the shortage, you're responsible. A lot of the recruitment agencies out there for your industry are responsible for sourcing, hiring them. You have either a temporary contract in place or a permanent, but normally a temporary one until they transition over to a permanent one with a client, perhaps, or they're locums with you guys. Basically, if you're responsible and there's a contract of employment, whether you call them workers or whatever, essentially, if they fall within that ambit of that definitions from the previous. Do you want to go back to the first slide, Miriam? The workers definition, and there's a contract of employment in place with you. If the contract of employment is with the client and themselves, then you're essentially just acting as a recruitment agency. But if the contract of employment is with you, even if it's temporary, even if they're paid by the third party, although it's sometimes a good indication of who's responsible, it would be you guys that need to get the sponsor license. You then issue the work authorization, and then what you do is you make sure you have the third party client contracts in place to support the outsourcing of them to either one site or one client or to multiple clients. Yeah, so that's where it becomes different, because a lot of people, a lot of agencies I've spoken to in recent weeks, they've got the contract employment in place, although they call them workers, not employees. They're paying them, and then they're outsourcing them to various locations. Okay, so who ultimately has responsibility for these workers, and who's the contract of employment with?
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Another question is, how long does it take to get a sponsor license?
Yeah, so officially, going back to official Home Office published processing times, is worst case scenario 16 weeks. There was a priority service available. And I say is and was because up to very recently, you could apply separately. So you'd submit your license with the worst case scenario being 16 weeks. And then you could apply via a lottery scheme of emailing the Home Office every day to say, well, we need this for priority, which would reduce it down to 10 working days. That didn't really tend to work because there was 10 allocations a day, and you can imagine how many people were applying. So what the Home Office did is then, they stopped that process, and then it implemented a priority service via the online system. So, but the only problem with that is you can't actually tell whether you're eligible for the priority service until you actually complete the application form. So 9 times out of 10, I'm going to prepare you for not 16 weeks Home Office official time. Like I said, provider help. You are likely to significantly reduce that timing. It's how the application is prepared. It's also the likelihood of you getting a visit, which is minimised if you use somebody that helps you out. Also, if you are visited and you fall short for compliance, you may be rejected. Oh no, refused, not rejected. If you refuse, there's a calling off period that applies for 6 months, which can adversely affect your recruitment needs over the next 12 months because you won't be able to apply. So officially, the quick answer is 16 weeks, but you can see again that there's loads of different answers I can give for the same question.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. Just following on to that, someone's asked how much it costs as well. Can we discuss costs, or can we address that in specific meetings if people book consultations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, we can, if there's a huge amount of questions that are asking for the same, then perhaps we can get a just generic follow-up for that after the call. However, I mean, like I said, you know, you go to loads of providers, and especially from my experience, and you'll have some providers that include mock audit, no, or mock audit. We can do either. So, you know, yes, you can go for the license, but would it be prudent to look at your housekeeping, your right to works, you know, to applying corrective action before the license is submitted? So there's that ambiguity. But there's also the main one here is you can get a sponsor license fee from anybody, but they will not, well, 9 times out of 10, they will not have a you know, kind of request for the allocations. So you could have 6 carers or 20 carers now in mind for the next 12 months. If you apply for the sponsor license without considering those individuals in the coming months, then you'll get your sponsor license, and it's no good. There's no difference between you having a sponsor license and no sponsor license if you haven't got no work authorization to issue people. So you must be asking for those allocations from day one, because otherwise your sponsor license is going to be no use for you from day one, and then you've got the extra added cost of £200 per person per job role for the Home Office, then the extra time in which could be up to 16 weeks for that process as well. So, you know, it's all about minimizing any costs and minimizing any time from the beginning of the process, and not and going back to one of the original questions, is that gentleman was very proactive about the compliance. So being proactive is the key.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And just 2 last ones before we close off. Is there any minimum or maximum of the contract terms? So they're just asking, is there like a limit on the contract terms?
Good question, if I'm understanding it correctly. So in terms of visas, ordinarily you'd issue visas sort of initially for a sort of over a 3-year period with a view to extending after 2 years, with a legitimate expectation to extend that. But there are instances, I'm going to be honest, normally I wouldn't ask. You can apply for a 5-year work authorization, and this feeds very much into your question, but I need to give you some context. So 3 years initially I would do, and then 2 years extension. You can do 5 years, right? But I wouldn't ordinarily do that, for the same reason as I mentioned. What if they leave you, or what if, and the government fees are very, you know, per year 624 for the immigration health surcharge. So I wouldn't ordinarily go for a 5-year, but you can know that the visa duration can be 5 years from start. Yeah, but your contract can never come under that. So you need to have it in line with what you're asking for. So no, most master service agreements, as we all know, will be open-ended. Yeah. But for specific projects, there might be an end date. But the Home Office is very clear that they're trying to avoid people body shopping. So they don't want somebody to take over all, to get the sponsor license and then just filter them out to, you know, any number of clients with no sort of oversight of it. So they're trying to avoid this body shopping, which is why they say to you have to have the work authorization in line with the contract, which has to be a fixed term project. So you can't actually in this instance rely on the master service as ongoing, but you can supplement that master service agreement with the schedules, which is often the case anyway. So they might be for 1 year, 2 years, etc., etc.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And then the last one in the chat, I can see someone's just asked, can an employer hire overseas workers without getting recruitment agencies involved? So it's pretty much what we just discussed. But
yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the nature of there's going to be a number of different instances, which is why we've offered the free consultations, because all your situations could be differently. But like I said, historically, recruitment agencies wouldn't need to worry about this sponsor license process, but like I said, the industry itself has changed, and if you've got overall responsibilities as a recruiter, you can hold the sponsor license. As an employee, you can hold the license, but certainly as well, what we can work with is we have a lot of contacts in this industry, and we certainly recognize there's shortages. We get contacted quite a lot, so in some instances, as part of our additional services and wider industry services, we can actually source candidates as well. So that's a completely separate matter, but I thought it was one mentioning for those of you. I've had a number of clients in the coming weeks have had difficulty even recruiting, or they didn't even know how to recruit for these individuals, or, you know, and they have been heavily reliant on recruitment agencies, but because of COVID or, you know, and cost, you know, they've had to just kind of do this themselves. And so we're quite happy, like I said, our wider approach at IES is to work in partnership with you, but certainly to, you know, to find a process that works for you. So whether you are having difficulty even recruiting them, or you need the sponsor license, we're here to help, just or as an all-round partner.
Okay, thank you so much, Laura. So if there's no other questions, I would just like to wrap up by saying that we will be sending out an email with a link that will allow you to book a consultation with Laura. It'll be a free 30-minute consultation that you can book, and then anything that you discuss in that consultation, you'll get a follow-up advice sort of email on there, and then you can decide what to do from moving forward from there. So if we don't have any other questions, we can end the webinar here.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to add, again, thank you so much for everyone joining me. As Mariam said, my colleague, actually, Peter, that's on the back of the call, is going to send out a link for everyone as well. So if you are keen to have a chat, no obligation, of course. But like I said, it's a good opportunity to ask any specific questions. And on behalf of IAS, we look forward to the prospect of working with any of you. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Very.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
That was great.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye for now.